I'm Rachel, 34 female. I live in a modest two-bedroom house that I worked tirelessly to afford, a quiet sanctuary in a bustling city where I run my own graphic design business from a home office. For the last year, however, that sanctuary has felt more like a prison, all because I tried to do a good deed for my own sister. It's a story about how a simple act of kindness can be twisted into a weapon, and how the person you're supposed to trust the most can become your greatest adversary. This is the story of how my sister, Sam, went from being my tenant to a hostile stranger in my own home, stopping rent payments, and then hitting me with a false harassment claim and a restraining order to avoid eviction. But she made one critical mistake. She underestimated just how far I would go to protect my home, my livelihood, and my sanity. She thought the law was her shield, but she never imagined it would become my sword. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. It all started, as these things often do, with a phone call. It was a Tuesday night, and I was wrapping up a branding project for a new client. My life was structured, predictable, and stable, three things I valued immensely after a chaotic childhood. My parents were loving but financially disorganized, and I'd spent most of my adult life building the security they never had. My younger sister, Samantha, or Sam, seemed to have inherited their free-spirited nature, which was a polite way of saying she was perpetually on the verge of a crisis. When my phone rang and her name flashed on the screen, my stomach did a familiar little flip. It was never a call just to chat. "Hey, Ratch," she began, her voice strained. "You got a minute?" I leaned back in my chair, already knowing this would be more than a minute. She explained that her roommate situation had imploded. Her roommate's boyfriend had moved in without asking, they were constantly fighting, and the landlord was threatening to evict all of them. Sam was caught in the crossfire and needed a place to stay, just for a little while, until she could get back on her feet. I hesitated. My house was my sanctuary. The second bedroom was my dedicated home office, the engine of my freelance career. Giving that up, even temporarily, would be a major disruption. But she was my sister. The images of us as kids, sharing a tiny bedroom and whispering secrets after our parents went asleep, flooded my mind. How could I say no? "Of course, Sam," I said, my practical side already screaming in protest. "You can stay here." We agreed she'd take the spare bedroom. Since it was also my office, I'd have to move my entire setup into a cramped corner of my living room. We also discussed rent. I wasn't looking to make a profit off my own sister, but I couldn't afford to float her entirely. My mortgage, property taxes, and utilities were precisely budgeted. I calculated the bare minimum I'd need to cover her share of the expenses. It came out to $600 a month, a fraction of what a room would cost anywhere else in the city. "That's amazing, Ratch. You're a lifesaver," she'd gushed. "I'll pay you on the first of every month, I promise." We didn't sign a lease. It felt too formal, too transactional for family. She was my sister, after all. I trusted her. That was my first mistake. We had a verbal agreement. She'd pay her share, clean up after herself, and respect that it was my home and workspace. She moved in the following weekend, bringing with her a mountain of clothes, musical instruments, and a whirlwind of chaotic energy that immediately disrupted the calm I'd cultivated. The first month was fine. She was grateful, paid her rent on time, and was rarely home, busy with her barista job and band practices. I rearranged my living room, squeezing my desk and computer between the sofa and the TV stand. It was awkward, and my productivity took a hit, but I told myself it was temporary. I was helping my sister, and that's what family does. My best friend Liam was skeptical from the start. "Are you sure about this, Rachel?" he'd asked over coffee. "Sam has a history of, well, being Sam." I defended her, saying she was just in a tough spot and needed a bit of support. "She's different this time," I insisted, trying to convince both him and myself. The second month, the rent was a week late. She apologized profusely, explaining that her hours at the coffee shop had been cut. She paid, and I let it go. The third month, it was 2 weeks late, accompanied by a story about an unexpected bill for her guitar repair. By the fourth month, the payment didn't come at all. When I gently brought it up, her gratitude had been replaced by defensiveness. "I'm trying, Rachel. You know how hard it is for artists. I thought you, of all people, would understand." She made me feel guilty for asking for the money we had agreed upon. Money I needed to pay the mortgage on the very roof over her head. This became the new normal. Each month was a new excuse, a new promise that she'd catch up next month. The atmosphere in the house grew tense. My quiet sanctuary was now filled with the sound of her electric guitar at odd hours, her friends coming and going without notice, and a growing pile of her dishes in the sink. My gentle reminders about rent and house rules were met with eye rolls and accusations that I was being uptight and acting like a real landlord. "I'm your sister, not some random tenant," she'd snap. It was a convenient argument for her to make. She wanted the protection of being family when it came to rent, but the freedom of a tenant when it came to responsibility. I felt trapped. I had opened my home out of love, and now that love was being used as leverage against me. The act of kindness was curdling into a deep and bitter resentment. The transition from a loving sister providing a safe harbor to an unwilling landlord with a delinquent tenant was gradual, then sudden. For months, I walked on eggshells in my own home. Every conversation felt like a minefield. If I asked about her job search or her plans to find her own place, I was pressuring her. If I mentioned the overdue rent, I was money grubbing. Sam had perfected the art of turning every issue back on me, framing my reasonable expectations as personal attacks. My home, once a place of refuge where I could decompress after a long day of work, now felt like a hostile territory. The living room, with my desk crammed in the corner, was a constant reminder of the space I had sacrificed, and her closed bedroom door felt like a barricade. Liam became my lifeline. We'd meet for walks, and I'd vent my frustrations while he listened patiently. "You have to set a firm boundary, Rachel," he'd advise. "This isn't sustainable." He was right, of course. My finances were starting to strain. Her missing $600 a month was a significant hit to my budget, forcing me to dip into my savings to cover the mortgage shortfall. My work was suffering, too. The constant stress and the chaotic environment made it difficult to focus on my design projects, and I missed a deadline for the first time in my professional career. The breaking point came 6 months after she moved in. She had not paid a cent in 3 months, and my savings were dwindling at an alarming rate. I decided I couldn't be gentle anymore. I sat her down at the kitchen table, my heart pounding with anxiety. "Sam," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk about the rent. You're 3 months behind, and I can't afford to keep covering you. We need to make a plan." Her reaction was explosive. She didn't just get defensive, she went on the attack. "I can't believe you," she yelled, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I'm out here struggling, trying to make my music happen, and all you care about is money. You have this big house, a successful business. You could help me, but you won't." The accusation stung, not just because it was untrue, but because it was so manipulative. She was painting me as a wealthy, unfeeling villain, completely ignoring the fact that I was the one who had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go. The big house was a modest 2-bedroom I had worked double shifts to afford the down payment on. My successful business was a freelance career that depended entirely on my ability to hustle for clients and meet deadlines, something that was becoming increasingly difficult with her in my home. "That's not fair, Sam," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "This is my home and I have bills to pay. I helped you because you're my sister, but you're taking advantage of me." That was the wrong thing to say. The word advantage flipped a switch. Her eyes narrowed, and the sibling rivalry that had been dormant for years came roaring to the surface. "Oh, I'm taking advantage? You're the one who's always had it easy, Rachel. Mom and Dad always praised you for being so responsible. You just love lording it over me." The fight devolved from there, a whirlwind of past grievances and baseless accusations. It ended with her storming into her room and slamming the door. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. I knew then that our relationship had been irrevocably damaged. The trust was gone, replaced by a toxic cocktail of resentment and entitlement. The next morning, she left without a word. I found a note on the counter. It didn't contain an apology or a payment plan. It was a single, defiant sentence. "You'll get your money when I have it. Stop harassing me." Harassing her for asking for the rent we agreed upon, the absurdity of it was staggering. It was clear she had no intention of paying or leaving. She was digging in her heels, using our family connect. Iron as a shield. The cracks that had been forming for months had just split wide open, revealing a chasm between us that I wasn't sure could ever be bridged. I was no longer just dealing with an irresponsible sister. I was dealing with a hostile occupant who believed she had every right to live in my house for free. I had to get her out, not just for my financial stability, but for my own mental health. The problem was, I had no idea how. After the explosive fight with Sam, the house became a Cold War zone. We coexisted in silence, communicating only through passive-aggressive notes or curt, one-word answers. The warmth that once defined our sisterhood had completely evaporated, leaving a chilling void. I was a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around, my anxiety a constant hum in the background. My work was tanking, and my savings were being eaten away month by month. I knew I couldn't let this continue. I had to take formal action. My first step was to consult the internet. I spent hours reading up on landlord-tenant laws in my state. It all seemed straightforward enough. Since she was a month-to-month tenant, I needed to give her a formal, written notice to vacate, providing her with 30 days to leave the property. It felt horribly official and cold to do this to my own sister, but she had left me with no other options. I downloaded a standard template, filled in her name and the address, and clearly stated the date by which she needed to move out. My hands shook as I printed it. This piece of paper felt like a declaration of war. I decided to give it to her in person. I waited until she came home from work one evening, my stomach in knots. I found her in the kitchen, making a smoothie as if nothing was wrong. "Sam," I said, holding the folded paper, "I need to give you this." She took it from me, her expression shifting from casual indifference to suspicion as she unfolded it. She read it, her eyes scanning the legalistic text. A slow, incredulous smile spread across her face. It wasn't a happy smile, it was sharp and cruel. "You're evicting me," she said, her voice dripping with mock disbelief. "You're actually, formally, evicting your own sister." "You've left me no choice," I replied, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "You haven't paid rent in months, and you refuse to even discuss a plan. I can't do this anymore." She scoffed, tossing the notice onto the counter like it was a piece of junk mail. "Fine, you want to play landlord? Let's play." She turned and walked back to her room, leaving the notice sitting there, a white flag of surrender I had offered that she had just spat on. The 30 days that followed were the most stressful of my life. Sam made it her mission to make my life a living hell. She started playing loud music late into the night, knowing I had early meetings with clients. She'd leave passive-aggressive notes on my desk, things like, "Must be nice to have enough money to kick out family." She began having friends over constantly, turning the living room into her personal lounge, making it impossible for me to work or relax. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare designed to break me. I counted down the days until the notice period was over, clinging to the hope that on that final day, she would be gone. The day came and went. She made no move to pack. Her things were still everywhere, her car was still in the driveway. It was as if the notice had never existed. When I confronted her, she just shrugged. "I'm not going anywhere," she said calmly. "You can't just throw me out on the street." I was floored. I had followed the rules, I had given her the proper notice. I told her if she wasn't out by the end of the week, I would be filing for a formal eviction with the court. She just laughed. "Good luck with that," she said, a strange, knowing look in her eye. 2 days later, my world turned upside down. There was a knock on the door. It was a uniformed sheriff's deputy. He handed me a stack of papers. My hands trembled as I read the top page. It was a temporary restraining order. Samantha had filed a petition with the court, claiming that I was harassing her, threatening her, and creating an unsafe living environment. The document was filled with a litany of lies, that I had screamed at her, tried to physically remove her, and threatened to throw her belongings out. She twisted our arguments about rent into claims of verbal abuse. The order stated that I was not to contact her, come within 100 feet of her, or attempt to remove her from the residence until a court hearing in 2 weeks. I had just been legally barred from evicting my sister, who was living for free in my house, based on a foundation of complete fiction. I sank onto my sofa, the papers slipping from my numb fingers. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. She had outmaneuvered me. I was trapped. The restraining order felt like a physical blow. Reading the fabricated claims, the twisted half-truths, ND outright lies was nauseating. Sam had painted me as an unstable, aggressive monster. She claimed my requests for rent were relentless verbal assaults, and that my attempts to discuss her moving out were threats of illegal eviction. The order stipulated that while we could both technically remain in the house, I was forbidden from speaking to her, approaching her, or doing anything that could be construed as disturbing her peace. In essence, she had weaponized the law to silence me and solidify her position in my home, rent-free. I was a prisoner in my own house, stripped of my authority and my voice. For 2 days, I was paralyzed by shock and fear. I stayed in my bedroom, my work completely forgotten. The thought of facing a judge, of having to defend myself against these horrific, baseless accusations was terrifying. Sam, meanwhile, seemed emboldened. She paraded around the house with a newfound arrogance, the restraining order her shield and sword. The quiet hostility of the past few weeks was gone, replaced by an air of triumphant ownership. She knew she had me backed into a corner. On the 3rd day, a spark of anger finally managed to burn through the fog of despair. This was my home. I had worked for every square inch of it. I would not be driven out or bankrupted by my own sister's deception. I knew I was out of my depth. The internet and its legal templates had failed me. I needed a professional. I needed a lawyer. My friend Liam, ever the pragmatist, had already sent me a recommendation. Arthur Vance, he'd texted. He's a shark, but he's the best real estate attorney in the city. He's expensive, but you can't afford not to hire him. I called Mr. Vance's office and managed to get a consultation for the next day. Walking into Arthur Vance's office was like stepping into another world. It was all dark wood, leather-bound books, and quiet, intimidating competence. Mr. Vance himself was in his early 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. He just listened, his face impassive as I laid out the whole sordid story, my voice shaking as I recounted the verbal agreement, the missed rent, the failed eviction notice, and the final, humiliating blow of the restraining order. I handed him the stack of papers the deputy had served me. He read through them in silence, his focus absolute. The only sound in the room was the rustle of paper. When he was done, he looked up at me, his expression unreadable. "This is a classic abuse of the system," he said, his voice calm and firm. "She's using a tool designed to protect victims of domestic violence to avoid paying rent. It's despicable, but unfortunately not uncommon." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't looking at me like I was crazy or guilty. He was looking at the situation like it was a problem to be solved. He then asked a series of pointed questions. "Did you ever have a written lease agreement, no matter how informal?" "No," I said, "just a verbal agreement." "Did she ever pay you rent via check or bank transfer, or was it always cash?" "Mostly cash for the first 2 months," I admitted, feeling foolish. "She said it was easier." "Did you provide her with receipts for these cash payments?" I shook my head, my heart sinking. "No, she's my sister, I didn't think." He held up a hand, stopping me. "Don't worry about what you should have done. Let's focus on what we can do now." He tapped the restraining order. "This is our immediate problem. We have a hearing in less than 2 weeks. Her claims are baseless, but a judge's primary concern is preventing potential violence. We need to dismantle her story." Then he paused, looking at me intently. "But there may be a more direct path here. You said you had a verbal agreement. Tell me everything you can remember about that initial conversation. Every detail." I recounted the phone call, explaining how I'd calculated her share of the expenses, utilities, insurance, property tax, and arrived at the $600 figure. I was adamant that I told her it wasn't for profit, but just to cover her costs. Mr. Vance leaned forward, a new glint in his eye. You told her the money was specifically to cover her share of the household expenses, not as rent for profit? Yes, exactly, I confirmed. He picked up a pen and jotted down a note. That could be very important. In our state, the creation of a landlord-tenant relationship often hinges on the payment of rent in exchange for occupancy. However, there are nuances. A simple cost-sharing arrangement, especially between family members without a written agreement, can sometimes fall outside the legal definition of a tenancy. He stood up and walked to his bookshelf, pulling down a thick legal volume. I need to do some research, he said, his voice now energized. There's a possibility, a slim one, but a possibility, that your sister was never legally your tenant in the first place. And if she's not a tenant, then she's not entitled to the protections of landlord-tenant law. He looked at me, and for the first time, he allowed a small, confident smile. If she's not a tenant, he said slowly, letting the weight of the words sink in, then she's a trespasser. And the process for removing a trespasser is very different and much faster. The word trespasser echoed in my mind. It was a harsh, definitive word, but it felt right. It was the legal lifeline I had been desperately praying for. The 10 days leading up to the court hearing were a blur of strategy sessions and anxious waiting. Arthur Vance was methodical and relentless. He had me write down every single interaction I'd had with Sam since she moved in, with dates and times where possible. He requested my bank statements to show the sudden stop in deposits from her, and my own withdrawals from savings to cover the mortgage. He also had Liam write a sworn affidavit, testifying to my character and recounting the conversations where I had expressed distress over Sam's refusal to pay rent, long before any talk of eviction. Liam's statement painted a picture of me as a concerned sister pushed to her limit, a stark contrast to the volatile aggressor Sam described in her petition. But Mr. Vance's primary focus was on the legal status of Sam's occupancy. He spent hours buried in case law, emerging from his office one afternoon with a triumphant look. "I found it," he announced during our call. "A precedent from a few years back, Coleman v. Davies. It involved a similar family arrangement, no written lease, a verbal agreement to chip in for bills. The court ruled that without a clear intent to create a formal tenancy for profit, the occupant was considered a licensee, not a tenant. He explained the difference to me in simple terms. A tenant has rights, including the right to a formal eviction process. A licensee, on the other hand, is someone who is on the property with the owner's permission. Once that permission is revoked, they have no legal right to remain. They become a trespasser. Our entire strategy hinges on this," he said. "We are not going to argue about the eviction. We are going to argue that the landlord-tenant law doesn't even apply here. We will prove to the judge that you offered your sister a place to stay out of familial kindness, not as a business transaction." The strategy was brilliant and terrifying. It meant everything rested on a fine legal distinction. As the hearing date approached, the tension in the house became almost unbearable. Sam was supremely confident, clearly believing her restraining order was an ironclad defense. She had no idea what was coming. Per Mr. Vance's strict instructions, I continued to avoid her completely, documenting every instance of her loud music or disruptive behavior in a logbook. The day of the hearing arrived. I wore a conservative gray suit, feeling like an imposter. Sam showed up in a demure dress, her hair pulled back, looking like the picture of innocence. She didn't even have a lawyer, a sign of her arrogance. She clearly thought she could win on her own sob story. We sat on opposite sides of the small courtroom. When the judge called our case, my heart hammered against my ribs. Sam went first. She told her story with practiced emotion, tears welling in her eyes as she described how her controlling sister had tried to dominate her life, and then threatened to throw her onto the street when she couldn't immediately pay rent due to unforeseen hardships. She portrayed me as a cold, calculating landlord, not a sister. She presented a few text messages, carefully selected to remove all context, where I had asked for the rent money. It looked bad, and I could see the judge's sympathetic expression. Then it was our turn. Mr. Vance stood up, his presence commanding the room. He didn't begin by refuting her claims of harassment. Instead, he started with a simple, foundational question. "Your Honor," he began, "before we address the petitioner's claims, we must first establish the legal relationship between these two parties. And it is our position that there is no landlord-tenant relationship to begin with." He laid out his argument with surgical precision. He presented my testimony about our initial verbal agreement, emphasizing that the $600 was a cost-sharing figure, not a rental fee for profit. He showed my mortgage statements and utility bills, demonstrating how the amount directly corresponded to a share of the expenses. He then introduced the Coleman v. Davies precedent. Sam's confident smirk began to falter as she listened. The judge, who had seemed sympathetic to her, was now leaning forward, intrigued. Mr. Vance then systematically dismantled her harassment claims. He submitted Liam's affidavit about my character. He presented the logbook of her disruptive behavior. But the masterstroke was when he called Sam to the stand for cross-examination. He was calm, almost gentle in his questioning. "Ms. Last Name," he started, using her formal name, "you claim your sister was your landlord, correct?" "Yes," Sam said firmly. "And you paid her rent?" "Yes, when I could." "And when you paid her, did you ever receive a receipt?" "No, she never gave me one." "Did you ever ask for one?" Sam hesitated. "No." "Did you ever sign a lease or any rental agreement?" "It was verbal," she insisted. Then the final blow. "Ms. Last Name, when your sister offered you a room in her home, did she say, 'I am renting you a room for $600 a month'? Or did she say, 'You can stay here, but you'll need to help cover your share of the bills, which is about $600'? The question hung in the air. Sam's face paled. She knew it was a trap. The two phrases were similar, but their legal implications were worlds apart. She stammered, I don't remember the exact words." "Let me refresh your memory with my client's sworn testimony," Mr. Vance said, pressing on. "She stated she told you it was to cover your costs. Is that false?" Sam looked from Mr. Vance to the judge, her composure crumbling. "She just wanted money," she muttered weakly. The judge had heard enough. He looked at Sam, his expression now cold. "Ma'am, the purpose of a restraining order is to prevent harm, not to avoid a financial obligation or a lawful eviction." However, the evidence presented by the respondent's counsel raises a significant question about your legal status in the home. He then delivered the verdict. He dismissed the restraining order, citing a complete lack of credible evidence of harassment. And then, the words I had been praying for. Furthermore, based on the precedent cited and the testimony given, this court finds that a formal landlord-tenant relationship does not exist. The petitioner is classified as a licensee. Her license to reside at the property has been revoked by the owner. She has no legal right to remain. He looked directly at Sam. "You have 48 hours to vacate the premises." The judge's words echoed in the silent courtroom. 48 hours to vacate. Sam's face was a mask of disbelief, her jaw slack. The smug confidence she had worn like a suit of armor had been stripped away, leaving her looking small and lost. The color drained from her face as the reality of the verdict crashed down on her. She had gambled everything on a lie, and she had lost spectacularly. She shot me a look of pure venom from across the room, a look that promised this wasn't over. But it was. The law had spoken. Mr. Vance advised that we leave the courthouse immediately and separately. "Do not engage with her," he warned. "The 48-hour clock is ticking. Let's not give her any ammunition to claim you're violating the spirit of the now-dismissed order." I followed his advice, walking out into the bright afternoon sun, feeling a sense of dizzying relief. The weight that had been crushing my chest for months was finally lifting. To ensure everything went smoothly, Mr. Vance arranged for a civil standby. On the day Sam was due to leave, 2 sheriff's deputies would be present at my house to keep the peace while she moved her belongings. It was an added expense, but one that was absolutely necessary for my safety and peace of mind. I didn't want a final, explosive confrontation. I just wanted my home back. I spent the next day and a half in a state of nervous anticipation. I stayed with Liam, not wanting to be in the house with her. The thought of what she might do in her final hours there was unsettling. Would she damage the property? Steal something? Liam was a rock, keeping me distracted with movies and takeout, reminding me that I had won and this was the final step. On the day of her departure, I arrived at my house 10 minutes before the scheduled time. 2 deputies were already there, their presence a calming, official barrier. Sam's beat-up car was parked in the driveway, and the front door was wide open. She had apparently hired a couple of guys from a gig app to help her move. They were hauling boxes and furniture out to a small, moving truck. Sam saw me pull up and her face hardened. She marched over, stopping just short of the deputies. "I hope you're happy, Rachel," she spat, her voice low and furious. "You threw your own sister out on the street, all for a little bit of money." I stood my ground, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice was firm when I replied. "You did this, Sam. You lied, you stopped paying, and you tried to ruin my life with a false legal claim. I didn't want this, but you forced my hand." One of the deputies took a half step forward. "Ma'am, let's just focus on getting your things loaded," he said to Sam in a calm, authoritative tone. Defeated, she turned away and went back to directing her movers. I stayed outside, watching from a distance as piece by piece, her life was removed from mine. Each box they carried out felt like a piece of my own life being returned to me. The ugly guitar amp that blar. Ed at 2 a.m., the piles of clothes that never made it into the closet, the canvases that leaned against every wall, it was all finally leaving. The process took nearly 3 hours. When the truck was finally loaded, Sam did one last walkthrough of the room she had occupied. I stayed with the deputies near the front door. She emerged a few minutes later, her purse slung over her shoulder, a single key in her hand. She walked up to me, her eyes filled with a bitterness so profound it startled me. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't apologize. She just threw the key on the ground between us. It landed with a small, metallic clink. "You'll regret this," she whispered, then turned and walked to her car without a backward glance. I watched her drive away, the red tail lights disappearing down the street. The deputies confirmed that she had left the property and that their job was done. "You have a good day now, ma'am," one of them said before they, too, departed. And then, for the first time in over a year, I was alone in my house. The silence was overwhelming. It was no longer the tense, heavy silence of 2 people avoiding each other. It was a peaceful, empty silence. It was the sound of freedom. I walked through the empty rooms. The corner of my living room where my desk had been crammed was bare. The spare bedroom, Sam's former room, was a mess. There were scuff marks on the walls, a few empty bottles left in a corner, and a layer of dust over everything. It smelled faintly of her perfume and resentment, but it was empty. The hostile energy that had permeated the house was gone, dissipated like smoke. I didn't feel triumphant or victorious. I just felt a deep, bone-weary sense of relief. I walked over to the front door, picked up the key she had thrown, and locked the door behind me, the click of the deadbolt sounding like the final word in the ugliest chapter of my life. The first few days after Sam left were surreal. I would wake up in the morning and for a split second, brace myself for the sound of her guitar or the tension of sharing a kitchen with a hostile stranger. Then, the silence would hit me, and a wave of relief would wash over me. The quiet was the most tangible sign of my reclaimed freedom. It was a beautiful, restorative sound. My first order of business was to reclaim my space, both physically and mentally. I spent an entire weekend purging the house of any lingering trace of her. I deep-cleaned her former room, scrubbing the walls, shampooing the carpet, and opening the windows to let the fresh air chase away the stale energy. There was some minor damage, a few mysterious stains on the carpet, and a series of small holes in one wall where she'd hung pictures, but it was nothing I couldn't fix. The cost of repairs was a small price to pay for my peace. The most satisfying task was moving my office back into the spare bedroom. As I set up my desk, my monitors, and my design tablet, I felt a sense of order and purpose returning to my life. Having a dedicated workspace again was transformative. My creativity, which had been stifled by months of stress, began to flow back. I contacted my clients, apologized for the recent dip in my productivity, and was met with surprising understanding. Within a few weeks, I was back on track, landing a new, lucrative project that helped me begin replenishing the savings Sam's stay had depleted. I also changed the locks. Mr. Vance had strongly recommended it. It was a symbolic act as much as a practical one. As the locksmith installed the new deadbolt, I felt like I was securing not just my home, but my future. A future where I was in control of who was allowed into my life and my space. The emotional cleanup was harder than the physical one. The betrayal by my own sister left a deep wound. Family gatherings became a source of anxiety. My parents, who had tried to stay out of the conflict, were caught in the middle. Sam had fed them a version of the story where I was the cold-hearted villain who had cast her out. I had to sit them down and, with a heavy heart, walk them through the entire ordeal, showing them the bank statements and the vile restraining order petition. Seeing the evidence, they finally understood the extent of Sam's deception. It was a painful conversation, one that laid bare the deep dysfunction in our family, but it was necessary. They didn't cut Sam off, but their relationship with her became strained, colored by the new knowledge of what she was capable of. I haven't spoken to Sam since the day she left. I hear things through the family grapevine. She's living with a friend, still struggling, still blaming everyone but herself for her problems. There's a part of me, the older sister part, that feels a pang of sadness for her. But the stronger part of me, the part that fought for my home and my sanity, knows that I did the right thing. I learned a hard lesson. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for someone else is to let them go and force them to face the consequences of their own actions. My kindness had become her crutch, enabling her behavior. By removing that crutch, I had given myself a chance to heal and, perhaps, forced her one step closer to growing up. My friendship with Liam deepened through the crisis. He was my unwavering support system, and I was immensely grateful for his clear-headed advice and loyalty. My relationship with my lawyer, Arthur Vance, ended on a professional and satisfying note. I paid his final invoice without hesitation. His services had been worth every penny. He didn't just win a case. He gave me the tools and the confidence to stand up for myself. Today, my house is once again my sanctuary. The spare room is a thriving hub of creativity, not a den of resentment. The living room is a place for relaxation, not a battlefield. The silence is peaceful, not oppressive. I lost a sister, at least for now, but I regained myself. I learned that my peace is not negotiable and that my home is worth defending, even if the intruder shares my blood. The scars of this battle are there, but they are a reminder of my own strength and resilience. I survived the storm, and in the calm that followed, I finally found my way back home.